Where did you like to play as a child? I ask this question a lot because childhood memories shape us into the people we become. Welcome to Play It Forward, a Wearthy podcast. I'm your host, Lukas Ritson. Thanks so much for joining me. I talk a lot about play. I'm a dad, I'm a husband, I'm an educator, and I'm a playground designer. So I wanted to gather some of my favourite people who are advocates of children and nature and create a space to have an honest conversation about getting more kids outside. The power of play is very often underestimated, and I think we all need a little more play in our lives.
Our next guest is considered a dear friend and also a teacher and researcher of landscape architect at Queensland University of Technology. He lectures at the Technical University of Berlin, Yale University, University of Canberra, University of Kassel, and University of New South Wales. Greg has received several high-profile research scholarships, 11 work-related works awards, and is about to publish his next book entitled Transforming Public Space Through Play with Routledge. He is the founder of Urban Synergies Group, an urban thinking voice for the UN Habitat, and fellow co-founder and director of the Australian Institute of Play. Today, we're going to be talking about the state of play as a standard, what makes a good playground, and a philosophical look at urban health and well-being. A big welcome into the studio, Dr. Greg Mews. We'll start off where we start off with all guests, a little walk down memory lane, a bit of storytelling. Where did you play as a child?
That's always a good one to start with, isn't it? Where did I start? I can put it back. Do you want early childhood or well, which stages? I mean, I would probably give you probably an earlier-ish version. I spent most of my time. I grew up in Germany to begin with. Probably figured out by my accent now. And
What accent? What accent?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, don't mention it. So I grew up just south of Berlin and in a small town, and spent quite a bit of time on the weekends, often out in the country with my grandparents. And they had a lovely big estate and a massive oak forest in front of the house. So I spent considerable time of my early childhood playing in that forest, but also because Germany, weather is not always that great. So spend quite a bit of time actually indoors, but mostly at the attic. Yeah. The old smoky, dusty attic, crawling around and creating imaginative worlds up there. So it's probably one of them.
Very, very different because we don't have those major seasons, but what I see the similarity between Australia and there is that need to be that secluded and independence.
Absolutely self-directed.
Yeah. And how did what's the leap between what happened between then and your passion to strike finding your realm and finding your feet in landscape architecture?
Well, to cut it short, probably it's the fine art of never growing up, right? And just keep true to your spirit, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then how you can utilize that passion in a most useful way and externalize that energy where you can help and facilitate.
Yeah. And you've had a bit of generational inspiration from your grandfather, the musician. Oh, flashback. Pulling out my intel now. Tell us about that. It's a really lovely story.
So a good part of my family, they were quite artistic always. So in particular that my great-grandpa, he was quite into music. He was a bit of conductor and had a chamber orchestra and so on. And he impacted a bit of the creative part of my life. Not that I can actually become a good musician or anything, but it more what sparked is that sense of curiosity. And I probably expressed more in art, given that I'm doing now and working in landscape architecture and it's more about drawings and how we can create imaginative worlds. But as any kind of form of art, right? They elevate the human spirit. And if you were exposed or imbued with that kind of energy early in your life, that definitely shapes who you become in that sense.
Yeah, and I like what you've mentioned in your TED Talk about something along the lines of that he was so kind to everyone as well.
Yeah, that's right.
Underlying character, and that transforms into acts of kindness, creating environments for people to thrive a few generations later. And also that conductor. A previous guest is the director of the National League of Cities in America. And they're going in and doing green schoolyards and how to get cities and municipalities to work together to create thriving neighborhoods. And his previous, in his previous life, before he got involved there, he was actually a conductor and classically trained conductor. So these similarities carry across the creativity, the kindness, the conducting that is necessary to create these urban environments. And then so you studied in Berlin, and then what?
Well, the thing is, before I studied in Berlin, I spent time in the US, and I studied art there. And then I went back to Berlin and studied planning and design, right? Urban design. And then once I graduated, then off I went again into the world. And that carried me pretty much from the Caribbean to Central Asia, Kazakhstan, and then all the way now back to Australia. So.
And what were you doing in those countries?
Well, somehow if there is a line, a narrative you'd like to follow in that regard, it's the passion for urban design and trying to facilitate conditions in which life can flourish, right? Intriguing enough, given that in the degree what I did is town planning, probably well understood in Australia is, then you wonder, town planning, how often do you ever plan a town, right?
Absolutely.
From scratch, I mean, yes, Canberra is one, but how often does it actually in fact happen? So it's more a matter of scale, and when you work at various different scales, then you comes back to the sense of the question of agency, and where can you drive transformative change towards facilitating these nurturing conditions? Is it in a strategy? Is it in an abstract master plan? Or is it something where you have access to everyday life and transform meaning creation? And I always argue what we are doing within the spatial disciplines is almost, we're part of the meaning market. So we're creating meaningful lives in that sense.
That's awesome. I love that, the meaning creation. And that's why I wanted to have you on as well. It's around, like, every time I have a chat to you, I walk away going, I've got to find out more about that. Or even get my dictionary out going, okay, I'm not sure what that word was, but I'll look it up. But I think there's so much to learn between looking at your expertise from these huge scales and then shrinking it right down, the macro versus micro, and shrinking it down to the realm of what we do and just the small play environments for early childhood. But you can see these similarities that carry across, and the things like, the nurturing strategy that you mentioned, that's integral for children's growth, and then that meaning creation. So could you give us an example of nurturing strategy?
That's a good one. I mean, let me start probably on a broader scale that more people can relate to it. So we're all born into this material world which we're surrounded with, right? So we're all agreeing this is the external world, and then within that world, you are living and breathing a world within that world, and that is socially constructed through your parents, through your friends, through your work contact text what you make, when you go to conferences. So it's a unique path how you experience a life in this. So, and that world within the world is constantly changing because people come in and out. So but it's also quite unique how life itself reveals itself in front of your eyes, and how you can engage with that world and within the world. And over time, of course, we're modifying the broader world, but more agency sits within this smaller world within the world. And when you go with that narrative and your socially constructed world in there, you have a sense of agency to say yes or no to certain things. But so choices you make, and then cumulatively they shape the path of how you go through life. That starts arguably when you come into this world. There's now science coming out that starts even before you becoming birth, because the mother has already this nurturing relationship with you, and it comes back always down to the environment from the internal to the external. if you want to work with that kind of dialectic, or you actually leave that behind and you say, what is it really, what makes it whole? So if you have these kind of understanding that we're actually operating this socially constructed world within the larger world, that means we are constantly facilitating and changing this socially constructed world. So often what we find is that that socially constructed world works adversely to conditions where nurturing childhood can occur. And that is dynamic and always constantly changing. What we can look into is how, and that's more an existential question, how do we want to exist? And that's a question everybody can ask themselves. How do I want to exist in the world? Not tomorrow, not yesterday, but now. And through the conscious choices you make now, you co-create a different kind of future. And the choices we make, of course, arguably should be well informed with evidence and all this broader science based, but often we don't have the time to engage with that. Hence why podcasts are a good format to break that down in small chunks and make it digestible to the audience. So it's more about how we can create these nurturing conditions in the socially constructed world within the world to achieve some better outcomes. And there can be deterministic, or they can be quite open and ambiguous. And it's really a question of what kind of life-giving forces you want to give energy to.
That's why I wanted to have you on. So how much of that agency have we, in recent times, are we automatically surrendering? We've got so much agency over that social construct, because you were saying about those choices you make all the time. But the environment in which we live in, all of these external policies, is it leaning towards us just surrendering to our environment and being a product of the environment and just giving up on our own social choices?
That's a good question to ask, and probably I can go into quite a bit of depth in that. So there's a part of it which you can actually critique the concept of free will, right? Does free will exist or not? Yes. And I'll probably stick to my discipline in that sense, and I would say the environment shapes us more than you might think. And everything what we're engaging when we have an urban way of life, for example, everything what you see around itself, it has been some form or the other designed with some sort of conscious intent behind it. There are certain, these forces, they were pushed by certain powers at play. And often the intent behind that, they probably compete, sometimes contradict, create tensions, or create adverse outcomes for health. On the other hand, we're a social species, we're geared towards convenience, have the easy life. And the easy life is not necessarily a question of upfront facing conflict and tensions, right? So if we are navigating through life the easy way, so to speak, we are giving up that certain liberty. So, but that liberty is up to you to choose it every day or in every decision where you have agency over in the moment. So, do I eat the ice cream? Do I not eat the ice cream? Do I walk down the stairs? Do I take an elevator? Do I want to spend my half an hour in the park, or do I want to spend my half an hour in front of the computer eating my lunch?
Absolutely. I'm recently just finished reading Atomic Habits, and it all breaks that down. It's like that incremental little choices, and it's the hard choice that get the flourishing results, and the easy ones that just get existing. A quote I heard, it says, if you want to be a mayor, a conductor, a politician, whatever you want to be, and your punishment for wanting to be that, you'll become that. And equally, your punishment for not wanting to be anything is that you don't become anything. See, like, okay, that's heavy. And to go into the realm of play and breaking that down and unpacking it a bit, what I try to convey to parents and families is that we want to create environments, because environments will create behavior. And we've kind of missed that a lot. But we all know it's true. It's like that relationship, what the what the heart's always known to be true, you kind of need a sentence sometimes to plonk it in the head and go, that makes sense. Like, for example, you go into a restaurant and the lights are bright and it's loud and you're going to last 2 seconds in there and you want to get out of there, opposed to a nice restaurant where you can sit, you can actually hear each other. The light's nice. It's not hectic. We know environments create behavior, but we kind of just surrender and we do it in our home, but why don't we think it on a bigger scale? Like people just defaulting into the should of neighborhoods where there's no interaction and you have to drive everywhere. And it doesn't seem to be community driven in a lot of circumstances. Where is that loss? Where have we lost that?
So you're arguing for that the environment creates behavior. Yep. That I go along with that, but to a certain extent, because there's the power of will. So let's say, for example, you walk down, let's say South Bank, right? And you say, oh, okay, this is the way for walking here. Yeah. But then you come up with your skateboard and you use every curb and things which is not intended to be skated on. But your willpower for play is there. So you're actually, changing through your behavior, that environment, it's a designed intent. So it's always, I think, it goes a long way and it has something to do with conscious overwriting certain transgressive forms of behavior. And when you do that, there's a sense of consciousness behind it, but also in play, and that is the beauty of play. It's such a broad, ambiguous concept that you find nurturing joyfulness within that. And that's a powerful tool, which is a life-giving force.
What sparked your interest in play from doing it from the urban standpoint, urban planning, design, and then you found yourself in the play realm? What was that?
Oh, well, you can either go with the Albert Einstein quote, play is the highest form of research. Play, or the whole universe is at play, right? And if you use that as almost as a life philosophy, all what we're experiencing is just full of wonder. And you have the opportunity to be open to that wonder in your everyday life. And play is a great window to look at the world.
And it physically opens up our view.
Oh,
from the physiological standpoint, it makes perfect sense when you delve into like the fulfillment it brings. Something I've been doing recently that people laugh at me, instead of saying, oh, thanks so much when I leave, I was like, I'm telling people, remember to have fun. The reaction I get from like people at like service stations or any interactions, remember to have fun. They always like, yeah, good one. What? But isn't it just the base of like existence? Like, why are we doing this otherwise? And I understand. And I'm not the one like, let's be happy all the time. That's not real.
No, that's not real. And that's part of life. It's a dynamic, right? So what you want to come from a space of genuine joy. And I think it's the same thing with happiness, right? Happiness is such an elusive concept. And you always, in a fleeting moment, you will have it. And then it ceases to exist. And that's why I always prefer to use the term well-being. There's a constant nice undercurrent which keeps you steadily flowing. And out of that, you can have these sparks, coming out of it. And that creates a dynamic. So the baseline of this, nice flow being well, that's where we want to be, and not being so violent in spiking up and seeking happiness and then going plummeting into depression.
When we highlight the importance of happiness, and that's the expectation, I should be the culture of the should, and I should be happy. The other polarizing nature of that is, what's the opposite? Because if I'm not one, I'm the other. So what about the middle ground? What about joy? What about reflection? What about all these things? They're not necessarily happiness. It doesn't mean they're bad or depressed or depraved or terrible or bad. Like, it's you are where you are, and that's okay.
Yeah, and coming back to your previous question, which I hinted to half of it, is to the new suburbs, right? So you can arguably say, well, we're creating now master planned designed products. which tick all the boxes, let's say, in its best case scenario, follow all of the guidelines. You have a nice open space system in there. You have well-designed playgrounds or play spaces, so to speak. Everybody has their, backyard and freestanding building, the dream, they're seeking to have there. But there's something which is inherently socially broken. That's something, the intangible. And play, from my understanding, brings that in. And then you can, let's say, look into an older, more established suburb, probably a few houses don't have necessarily the good open space system, maybe have just a footpath or even no footpath. But then for some reason, there are a lot of kids playing on the streets, right? So then you think, so what is the story here? What is going on here? And that brings it back to my earlier comment, which referred to the world within the world. What kind of conditions, nurturing conditions, were involved here to create a socially constructed world within the world which facilitates it? And that's where we have to pay attention. And that's unfortunately because we're in this system geared towards paying attention to materiality. We lost that focus. And play is a great opener. If you want to understand life and possibility, understand play.
And it seems like we've created a culture of resourcing our satisfaction or resourcing our existence. We need to have this thing that injects into us to make it feasible or make it any worthwhile. And I know it's we're going to the other end of the scale, but in the end, you can't take it with you.
No.
You can have all of these trophies. It's not going to matter. And what about that joy along the way?
That's the art of living. There's a great French philosopher, which I always use in some of my lectures, is Henri Lefebvre. He's a Marxist, but he touches on, and there is a subtle idealism in him. And he described that concept, the oeuvre. So this is the state of existence when life becomes art. It's a higher state of existence, so to speak. But if you say play is the art of existence, so then that is essentially the oeuvre. And if we can create and facilitate conditions where not just you or me, but everybody can achieve that oeuvre within that external material world, which is not equally distributed to everyone, but everybody has that possibility. And why do we deny that? Why do we have generations of adults which literally forgotten how to play? I mean, how do they want to move and find joy in life if they have not found that spark? Or perhaps maybe in a formalized way, let's say, sports or so, they're dedicating it to a fraction of time as part of their weekly routine. That's when they're allowed to have play. But what on earth led to that kind of condition where we created a system which just allows us to be joyful in a certain moment?
What do you think it is? What is the contributor to that?
Oh, I have some thoughts about it. Probably because I'm using a lot of these post-Marxist theory, it helps me to understand that in the contemporary conditions of the markets, how it all works and how we commodify and enable then products like these new suburbs, right? So it's really that we've to an extent, on a larger scale, if you generalize, we're society probably we lost a bit the way. We drifted too much into materiality. I always say we lost the materiality. And each one can ask itself, like, how far do we identify with material things there? There's nothing wrong with them. You can enjoy, a nice experience and all this. But the thing is not to get too close to attached. And that's the art of play in life, right? You enjoy for whatever it is. And when you played enough with it, then you're moving on. So there are no hard feelings. And that's the beauty about children. Often, in most cases, they're very forgiving. They are, of course, there's a dark side of play when they're rough together, but then they learn something about life. So the early phases when they negotiate the rules for life, right? Everything is ambiguous, open, and you co-create it to an extent because, of course, they have been genetically imprinted in certain programs of how to make sense of the world. But in the earlier stages, they're much more open. And that's the beauty of it. So if you understand how children play, you become more attuned to the possibilities of life if you choose to give them space and time.
It reminds me of that story of Picasso walking through the square. The lady says, "Draw me a picture." He does a scribble. He says, "What is this? A child could do this." He says, "It's taken me 30 years of practice to be able to act like a child and to draw like a child." Because it's like that realm, what you're saying, it's the play aspect. And, play for me is about the process, and play in general. It's just not for me personally, but play about the process, not the outcome. And the culture is completely reversing that. And additionally, the being, not the doing. So what do you do? How are you? Oh, so busy. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. I want to say sorry about that. It's a default. What? It's held on a mantle, and we wear it as a trophy. How are you? Oh, busy. What are you doing for you? Oh, no time for myself. And it's fleeting in the scheme of things. Like, not to get morbid again, we're here for a split second.
Mm-hmm. And it comes back down to the way of how we designed this world within the world through dialectics, or you say to black and white thinking, right? I just give you an idea from the book what I'm.
Yes, I'm so excited about that.
Tell me.
How long?
It's been
How long's it
painful
been?
process. Or 4 years, 5 years in making.
Just out of my pure interest, because I have the aspirations to write a book, and I have the aspirations to study in an academic type of way like you are, but realistically, I know that's not going to happen. But I admire the fact that there's people like you doing it. And in regards to reading a book, how many hours a week?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, it's largely based on my PhD, so I could utilize big chunks of it. But I think, again, like, it comes back down to this process. What do you like? What do you enjoy, the product or the process? And I quite like the process. So, a couple of hours every day. So I just literally, write something out of my brain that I can relax. Yeah. So
that's awesome.
But the interesting thing is, because I'm focusing on public space to understand play, and there is something which gives me hope to society, because often what we are conditioned in how we base the rules for the system is that we live in this endless world of competition, right?
Yeah.
Everybody needs to compete here in this marketplace. If you want to go for bigger tenders, it's all about competition, and it's an efficiency measure, performative, bidding and all this. So, but what I found is when people go their way every day, and I put myself into a public space in Canberra, Garima Place, for more than a week, every day from very early morning till very late. And I was sitting there and looking at people, right? So I created this massive data set of how people, and then to a degree it's reductionist, because I'm just looking at play from my perception view, but actually I could categorize it, what kind of play occurs. And then I got a bit of an understanding what type of play activities do happen most. So I used some of these concepts from other thinkers out there. Roger Calloy is one of them, and he distinguished between 4 types of play, which is vertigo, twisting, shaping, turning around, swinging, for example. Then there is competition. No, don't need any explaining. Then there is simulation. So when you actually engage in dreaming, and we're creating that, we're pretending that this table is actually a massive canvas. What I found out is actually that from all these 4 forms of play is that competition is the least one which people most engage in as part of their everyday life in public spaces.
So they're not intrinsically motivated to go after it.
No, that is from, I don't know, I looked into 1,000 instances of play as part of that throughout the week, and most people engage in any other form except play for competition. Then shows me something. Maybe it's because we have dedicated spaces, formalized spaces where we do that, or it's simply not part of our everyday life existence. This is an artificially created one. And then I looked further into that question of competition, because it sparked my curiosity, try to understand the meaning behind it, is that there's nothing wrong with competition. But the thing is, what probably we have perhaps not well understood in our society. It's about competition within yourself. How, if you are willing voluntarily through play is a voluntary activity. If you want to push yourself to set a goal, then you can do in self-competition with yourself, but never compete against another person, because each one of us is a product or in the process of coming from a different world within the world, and so had different conditions which made them who they are in this moment in time. So by understanding that diversity of life, there's difference. And maybe whatever difference there offer lends itself better to a different other condition. But at the end, setting up entire societies based on peer-to-peer competition is actually ripping us apart in the long run, rather than actually creating this. And I'm not saying it's not about originality, or the originality occurs through the creative spirit which sits in each one of us. When you yourself, internally,
not against
exactly.
each other.
No, and then through collaboration, you elevate that, because, and you find it as a connecting principle. What makes us actually human is we are a social species, and through competition we play that in a small scale, but we play against each other, and this is a form of game, of course. But I think it's in the long run a pretty self-destructive.
Yeah, and we'll look at the result of such a competitive environment. Like, look at people's well-being under that. Look at the compare culture. Look at the impact of social media with this fake mirror filter in front of you. It's having we're removing the experience from self completely, and that's what I try to encourage in not a similar way within interactions in play. So when it comes to an educated parent, saying you don't need to dictate their goals, support them to achieve their own. Nothing's more satisfying to someone engaged in play to achieve their own goals, not yours, not the other person's. And then all of the well-being in it. And you've articulated it beautifully, as you always do, is that you've created that internal self. You're contributing to internal identity. You're contributing to like the self-worth, the values, the accomplishment, the identity of self, and the values around you. To go back to your observations around playing competitive nature and generally not gravitating towards it, do you think that is a product of there being so much competition in community, in the environment around them, that when they're intrinsically motivated to play, they're like, I'm not even going to play, go into that realm because I get enough.
I mean, it would be interesting to carry out some further research on that, I must say. But generally, I would say we are, as a society, create certain conditions which we favor certain behaviors, right? So if we are actually co-producing or co-produced over so many years a system which favors and values competition as a driving force, then of course other parts being left behind. We are also, if we are becoming, in our process, we're always becoming these products of these environments. So how far are we programmed or ground conditioned to operate that? Because we have normalized that concept, that we do not even question that narrative or that concept as society. Why should we take that this is the way how everything is? But no, it doesn't. The thing is, if you step out of the self in that sense and observe life from a remote distance, from a calm point of view, you will see how this kind of sense of madness actually reveals itself. And the way of how we design environments is, I think, to a degree, a really good reflection of our collective values. And also the way of how we are self-perceiving ourselves in materiality and giving.
And you've just given me some clarity on a question I ask myself all the time. I travel a lot and go out to semi-rural to rural communities. And I'm going out there and I look over to the right and there's a whole housing estate surrounded by farmland, surrounded by beautiful amounts of land, and the gutters are almost touching. And I just think, why on earth would anyone want to come all the way out to the countryside to live on top of a person? But when you look at that collective mindset, the collective value, Like that's it. They're going out there because that means can have this house. Meanwhile, they're not considering the impact on their children, the impact on their own health, the impact of not being able to walk to the shop. Another great statistic I heard you reference which I was amazed about, was the distance to shops and other infrastructure in Australia. Like a huge percentage is like a kilometre.
Yeah, 30% under kilometre and 50% under 5 or something.
Yeah, it's amazing. Our default in Australia is that, we have to drive because everything's so far apart.
You don't have to. You don't want to. Depends actually how we make do and and co-create.
And we're looking at Germany and the other European countries that have the culture of transport on bikes or out there, probably traveling the same distance that we are.
I mean, my commutes were 12 kilometers when last time I was in Germany, so one way on the bike, but beautifully through the landscape, right? So through from my town, through fields and forests all the way to my work.
To go into your role now, let's flash forward. Can you just break down your role at the university now for our listeners?
I'm lecturing within landscape architecture at the moment, and keep in mind I have a background in urban design and planning. And I'm putting my energy into three types of units. One was health and well-being, and how we can create landscape for well-being. The second one was because I've been doing a lot of work transcending global north, so to say, and global south, so countries in Africa, Southeast Asia, and so on, where we embedded some of these theories for change. What I said, like how we really socially create this world within the world, and then out of dreams, particularly working with young people, how we can utilize their dreams and translate them into some tangible outcomes, how we can co-create better outcomes for a community. And so we applied that in Sierra Leone and received overwhelmingly successful results, and that wasn't celebrated at some of the UN Habitat conferences. So that was really really heartwarming breakthrough, but it confirmed one thing, that if we are willing to be open-minded, to re-educate ourselves, and carefully willing to listen, deep listen to each other, we have the chance to really co-create a different kind of future, and renegotiate what we are becoming.
The word you've mentioned a few times there, co-create. So can you break that down? Like, say, I know it's to break it down in a broad sense, there's a podcast, but in the context of supporting African towns and children in Africa, what does that co-create relationship look like?
Well, so let's say start from your and my within the word. So we are, quite privileged, middle-aged males, standard, and we're we really have a quite privileged life. So our dreams might be very different to somebody who has not had that privilege. So when you go into these communities in Africa, it was important that we just work on equal eye level and give weight to their dreams. It's not about our dreams, which we're imposing in a colonial sense onto a different society and coming in and saying, now, because we were living through material wealth and we ticked a lot of health parameters, you need to have that now too. So we took that arrogance aside and applied quite this decolonial way of thinking at it. And so that means that's all about you. And it's in fact actually not about each and one of you individually. It's about what you can dream together. And that is a powerful message because you have to negotiate through all your differences. What is worthwhile? What comes back down to this question of mattering? What really matters, not just to you individually, but to a whole bunch of people. And that is the core to co-creation, by agreeing through democratic processes of what is matter worthwhile keeping.
Agreeing about a need, not a want.
Exactly. And I think that's where we have to be really careful in the way of choosing language. Often we are ending up in these wants, and that is working with desires.
Yes.
And there's nothing wrong with desire, as I mentioned before. However, the way of how we're interpreting and how we're utilizing that concept to justify certain narratives in society is concerning. So given that we are, let's say, in built environment landscape, so to a degree from a power concept perspective, our job is to create meaning, which means we're working with visuals and desires. So we seduce people into these kind of worlds which we are sharing with them. So that's to a degree the success of our jobs, right? But being conscious of that and saying this is not about what we bring to the table. We are the facilitators, and we're actually conscious about that. So we are actually we're paradigming a new way of existence. So therefore, this is more about you. And the more we actually empower you to co-create, which works with openness and ambiguity, you don't know where the process ends up with, but it enables an environment for trust. And again, comes back to life-giving forces, which is very much, we play with them together at equal eye level, and then negotiate a way forward, which is beneficial not just to one, but to a collective.
That's where identity comes from. Identity in relationship. Is that correct? Could those things be summed up as relationships as well? Like you're within the social construct, that could be a relationship. And then your relationship with the broader world. Just trying to put it into a term that people can maybe relate to. And then you're creating environments within environments from a tangible sense.
Precisely. It's very relational. I mean, it's interesting for how when I had that conversation with my students a couple of weeks ago around space and time.
Yes.
So it's very deeply philosophical. But when you come back, there's another great writer, David Harvey, and he had a big go at space and time defining. And what is really insight and worth probably keeping in mind, and where we position ourselves and how we understand space and time. So space, for example, you can take three approaches from that. The first one is the abstract realm of space. So we think there is a measurable confidence, like in the room where we're sitting in, or where the listener is sitting in. So you can actually apply a measurement, a tool. There's something concrete, solid. It's abstract. We can create a plan and then we put it in and then it's there. So this is one form of space. There's a second form of space, which is actually the relative space, right? And it comes from Albert Einstein. So let's say when you live down here in the Gold Coast, I'm come in Brisbane, so it takes me an hour to get here. If I actually choose to walk from my work to my home, it takes me 45 minutes. So geographies of time play a big important part, how much space you bridge in order to create a world within the world. So that creates more resources if you live further away, but you also have time. Let's say you take a high-speed train where you can compress that space-time. So, and then there's of course a third space, what you just touched on, that was the relational space. And that is a space of dreams where memories sit, all this intangible. And arguably you can superimpose that on to these other two spaces. And that creates a sense of messiness, right? And probably when you have to ask me which space is the right space, like if you think about black and white, and it's like, no, probably they all work together. But that creates this messy and complexity around it. And if we work with openness and complexity, why on earth are we trying to put it into one of these boxes? Why are we, as individuals, are conditioned to always think about this is must be absolute? Why don't we let it open be and choosing again what matters within these different conceptions of time space, or space time?
And look at children in their exploration of environments and play. They use the tangible space through absorption of their senses to gather an understanding of the intangible.
Precisely.
The huge disconnect I observe time and time again is where we're trying to teach children from the intangible place about tangible things like care for the environment. And the child goes, where is it? And they go, it's everywhere. What's in it? Everything. And poor Alex, a 4-year-old, is going, what on earth are you talking about? Instead of just exploring and experiencing the environment, and that being, I like the word, that world is a representation of that. And another one is when they're trying to teach social interactions. Oh, Alex, don't go in James's space. He's looking so perplexed, going, what are you talking about? I can't see it, touch it, anything. Now, when there's that confusion around identity in space, relationships as well.
And that kind of adult power unbalance, right? When we're saying what is right, what is wrong, shapes these small spirits already and impacts their life in quite traumatic way. Because often we don't even think about it because we're used to it. That is the word how we become to learn to exist in.
Yeah.
But these are like clean sheets of paper. You know, they are beautiful, full human beings, and we are saying you are not a full human being. Because you did not have these experiences what we had, so we have to burn you now into the shape you in this past. Because this is a way of how we are existing. But the thing is, when you look around and see the violence and all this physically and spiritually around ourselves, we ask ourselves like, why are we doing this to them?
Yeah. And why are we recreating children in a model of ourselves which are so flawed in ourselves?
Oh, yeah.
I understand we are flawed, and that's a part of life.
Facto,
No one's. You don't. Okay, let's get someone perfect to teach all the children. Good luck. I'm not saying that, but all I'm saying is why we're teaching them our own bad habits and our own lacking understanding.
And I mean, from a parent perspective, to protect them, everybody, I would say, does with a good intention do their very best to raise a child.
Yes. 100%.
Without saying.
Yeah.
But it always, and that comes back to the way of how we constructed the social words within the word, because they had coming out of a social word constructed which was full with trauma. Yeah. So they have been impacted of their life to condition within certain narrow boundaries. Yeah. And so within these boundaries, they're doing their very best. But I'm not saying then we can co-create a very different future. And that's where I found ambiguous concepts, invisible concepts, or concepts which you can't grasp and confine are really the transformative ones, because they can elevate our spirit in that sense and give us these forces how we can actually have a conversation and escape that. So, for example, my urban lovability concept, right? If love is intangible, and I'm not saying the physical love here, like I'm talking about more the compassion type of love. So where you are open and willing to share something with another person, knowing or not knowing, doesn't matter. But there's something you're willing to give a compromise, to make a contribution. So if you give that contribution, that is an connecting principle. For example, I have plenty of water, you are very thirsty, I have abundance, of course I'm sharing, no worries, right? So when it becomes scarce, then it comes a different negotiating part, but then even then when you share, there's more beauty in that, because together we're stronger, but it needs a certain actualization around that. So, and if people have been deprived of a lot of these experiences, how could they know any different? But often when you show, no matter what kind of instances, kindness from a compassionate point of view, that can be a very powerful transformer. And joy and play, you will see when you want to learn about how this lovability works, look at children playing with each other. Yes, there might be, we're competing and saying this is mine, so because the ego is full in its development, but often they're very forgiving. They have a fight, and 5 minutes later they go apart, and then 10 minutes later they're starting from scratch again. Adults don't do that.
No.
I know in 1984 we had a conversation and you were really insulting me, so therefore I did not talk to you today.
How dare you, culture.
Exactly. Precisely right. But so it doesn't happen overnight. So again, it comes back down to this idea of becoming. It's a process, as you so eloquently elaborated on earlier, and it is a question of mattering and of values again. And unfortunately, I think we do not create enough time in space to have these kind of quality discourses around what really matters. There was an opportunity that perhaps the window is still open since COVID is hitting all our societies. People are contained at home. They're deprived of social connections. We all agreeing digital world is simply not the same as it is as true face to face. As many of our fellow citizens actually experiencing at the moment down in Melbourne or Sydney, New South Wales, Victoria, so on. And I hope when they come out of the lockdown that they take the time to really reconsider some of their value propositions.
The brilliant thing about, if you could say anything brilliant about a pandemic, would be that it is prompting that reflection on wants versus needs.
Absolutely.
What do I actually need here?
Yeah.
And the amount of people having a career change, the amount of people saying, actually, I don't need to go work in an office in the middle of the city. And businesses going, actually, we don't need that. We just wanted it because it was just what we've always done. So there's great opportunity. And a mutual friend of ours, Steve Kanowski, taking that opportunity to say, well, I've got a great opportunity to adapt and create some wicked big change at this point in time. And I've spoken to other schools and promoted the same concept of saying, well, isn't now the perfect time for change? You're not going to have, not everyone's a bit jumbled up. Everyone's a bit uncertain. And let's act now. In that word that pops up, I've got my notes here and I've written it a few times, a certain versus uncertainty. Is that what's driving our social constructs and our environmental living? Is this need for certainty? It's just a word that keeps popping up for me recently.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, here again, we're starting with working with dialectics.
Yes.
So with dualism,
absolutely.
Right? And I'm a fan of always creating new knowledge, which actually overrides dialectics now.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's a good starting point because it shows you where the tension is, right? And if that pops up in your life at the moment, in your social world within the world, you see there's some tension going on at the moment. And time to, if you experience this tension, this is time to put energy into it and have this conversation. So certainty is often masking itself under comfort. But certainty is also, which is good for probably periods of time to rest and rebalance before you go out and have your next joyful endeavor. So when you start another play activity, so to speak. And that's when you become uncertain, where you go with trust into the world and co-create something different. Of course, it's a balancing approach. You need to have time for certainty. Let's say, for certain, I need my good 8 hours sleep because then my brain function is optimal next morning. So I'm grateful if I can get that happening. But from there, I let myself, every day is a new day. I'm born every day in that sense. And then I give myself into this uncertainty and see how I'm journeying through this day. So, so it's more a matter of how you use this concept to shift a paradigm. So what kind of paradigm do you want to exist in? So I come, again, my existentialist argument. Do you want to exist within certainty, which I can, if you give it too much energy, can put you into stagnation and corners you, because it masks life. It's not feeling alive. When you play, for example, you engage in vertigo, twisting, and all this. Boy, you quickly feel alive because your physical body is like, pumping blood and all sorts of things. If I would actually be certain and I would sit in the chair all day, my butt keeps pumping slowly, but I see life passing in front of my eyes instead of actively engaging in it. But it's all about the balance. And that's why, again, I think we can depart here from the dualism and think about, again, between what brings us together. I mean, I put that to you. What do you think? What brings certainty, uncertainty? What holds it together? What is an umbrella term which can reconcile with it?
Yeah, it comes down to that. What's the meaning of that word to you, doesn't it? Like you mentioned at the start there. So.
But if you use experience, of course, there's just different experiences, right? Some experiences are more certain, have a higher probability to occur than others, right?
Or it's just perception.
Oh, and perception is also quite ambiguous, right? Because my sense of sight is not as good as yours, so I perceive things differently than you.
Wow.
So, like, even within both us sitting in this room, my world within the world is looking at you, and I see you here, nice wooden panels behind you, and you see myself from a different angle. So you're again having a perception of this world from a different angle. So, but the thing is, the more we all overlaying and looking at us ourselves, we actually, there's some common shared ROM in it, and that is what makes it real.
I think we had a conversation about one time, was like, it's not based on your experience, our relationship using our senses to talk. It's not, your experience isn't real, mine experience isn't real. It's actually what's happening between this space, which is actually the real. When we had that chat, I was like, I think I just broke my brain.
Sorry, I
No,
seem
it's
to
good.
frequently get that feedback lately. My students say the same.
It's good.
Yeah.
It elevates and articulates, and we need to have these conversations because it's important. Otherwise, you're just this passenger. You're just a subject of what you've accepted. When it comes to your students, as you mentioned there, and they're moving into the realm of landscape architecture, when they graduate and they leave, what do you want them to take from their years at university into being a landscape architect?
Probably criticality.
How so?
Oh, well, in every respect, right? So landscape architects work at all scales, right? So they work on the big issues, the climate change issue, all the way down to garden design, right?
Yeah.
And what I probably, if I can express a wish to them, is actually that they never lose the sense of play, to play around with concept and question whatever they encounter, because imagination is more valuable than any kind of learned knowledge.
Yeah.
And criticality is a way of looking at the world through a playful window, right? And a window which allows for the imagination to occur. Thought, of course, is useful as a tool because it helps you to deconstruct a certain way and understand where the tension points are. But to be honest, even every theory is what we call reductionist. It's a reduced way of understanding things. That's why we have them theories out there. But if you want to experience life in its fullest, that goes beyond language. And play is, again, once more, a very powerful concept, because if you were existing in a playful state and you're experiencing the world as is through all the senses, that is more than anyone can, transcribe to, or or translate to. It's just a way of how existing. So you're embodying a different paradigm in that sense.
Yeah. And when, as a adult, have we felt that sense of pure joy and fulfillment that you get as a child, where all aspects of your life feel joyous, and it's completely embodied? Like when you reflect on it, and then you reflect how your body feels, head to toe, everything encapsulated. Your book, when is it going to be released?
Well, I submitted it, so it hopefully depends how long the editors take. I think early next year.
Yeah. Transforming public space through play. I'm excited about that.
Thanks.
That's so exciting. What do you hope people to? Who do you want to read it? What do you want them to get out of it?
Oh, thanks for asking. First of all, I'm going to be just happy when that thing is done. Despite of the fact, actually, I did enjoy the process of creating it. But again, it's probably
why you want it done, because you're like, well, the joy's gone now.
Yeah, exactly. So I finished next thing.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking about the next project, right? But it's targeted for anybody who is willing to open the window of play, and understand whatever can from a professional context see in the world. So it's an awareness tool. It's a framework in there. It's literally the development of what I call the city play framework. How we can understand public spaces in dense urban centers through the window of play, and see the full possibilities and potential a particular space, confined space, or whatever is in the brief, holds for life-giving forces. And that often overrides functional designs, and also almost can be applied as a mitigating effect before you come in as a designer and you say you get to open a new brief and you get a tabula rasa approach. You start a whole from scratch for the site. I said, no, understand life first. And if you want to understand the most complex part of life, study the play activities in that space. And if you gain that understanding, you see how you can gently modify the conditions to nurture that more, rather than saying, let's take it all out and then we put our design thinking head on, and because I envisioned that, and then this will have to work for everyone, which it often doesn't.
Yeah, and just don't present the resource. There's a resource. Here you go. This is for you to do in, not be in, just do in.
Doing, yeah.
Do you want to? Can you tell us Urban Synergies? It's your little baby, so to speak. What is it about? I know what it's about. I've read your documents on park assessments and things, and they're great, and we get very excited about them and how you break it down.
Thanks. Yeah. It was my passion project. It's been more than 7 years now. I mean, we kept it always very small, informal, and boutique, rather than making it a big thing. So, because we used it as a vehicle, as a social entrepreneurship model, to bring difference into being. So, and focusing on really what mattered to everybody who was part of that network. And a big part of it was a focus on well-being for children.
Yeah.
So we started and did a lot of work with, including the assessment sheet of how we assess play value of a particular play space. And there were some of these products that came out of this journey where we helped to facilitate transformative change in that sense. So in the Canberra context, in that sense, we did big shaping spaces for Gen Z Forum, where we said we want to create child and youth-friendly environments for the whole city. So how do we do that? How can we work with this uncertainty and bring certainty into it, so to speak, if I play with it? And then, of course, the power of co-creation kicked in, and a whole set of principles and strategies came out of that process, and the government started then to action that, and we were a part of that journey onwards. And as often it's an open-ended process and dynamic, but we pushed, let's say, we did make a contribution to the ACT context in that way forward, for example. I mean, we did, of course, do more work in Africa and in Europe, but
What excites you most about the future of landscape architecture and play?
Well, the thing is, I think what the pandemic has shown is the value of open public spaces for well-being, for health and well-being for the broader population, no matter where you live. If you're in a suburban context, during the way of the park's infrastructure were closed because you're not allowed to touch them, you're not allowed to touch playground equipment, but you were able to walk, right? So I found, and I've written with another dear colleague of mine a paper around that, where we observed what happened here in Australia.
I like the title.
Oh, you did?
Share that?
Oh, yeah, please.
You go.
It was titled On the Life and Death of Public Space During COVID-19 in Australia. So we just had a conditioned eye for that and looked around what happened during this first phase of lockdown in Australia. And what we found is that was temporarily an opening where everybody opened that window to paradigm a different state of existence, which escaped commodification. If I'm going to come back to my Marxist thinking, is commodification in the sense you do not engage with products. You have no other choice but to co-create with people next to you and become very creative to co-create spaces where you can share togetherness. For example, that means people in their front yards had their dinner picnics out there. And then you could see people walking by. You could not get close, but at least you got some kind of, you created temporary social space, so to speak, where you were actually invited and it had social connection, so social encounters to a degree. Or you walked around and what you saw with all these children doing all these chalk drawings on the street, here we go. The oeuvre in the making, because people were hyper-localized, forcefully, but it created that opening for a time and created this condition for reflection and a time for questioning yourself what really matters to you in life.
100%. And we'll put the link to that in the show notes for the listeners to read, because it's a good read. And anywhere else our listeners want to find out more information about your work, where can they find you?
I think the search engines, the web has it all.
And I'll also I'll just put the link into the TED Talk and some links to your stuff as well. But Thank you so much for joining us today on Play It Forward, but also thank you on a personal level. You always inspire me to not just think bigger, but think deeper. And I think that's one of the most valuable things we can take into our daily existence and having impact on children's lives and our community's lives. And can't wait to continue to work with you at the AIP and have amazing impact. And once we get a bit more projects together under the belt with AIP and get in the field a bit more, I'd love to have you back on and we can discuss like more action-based, community-inspired stuff happening. So
thank you for having me. I'm grateful, and all power to you.
Thanks so much. Thank you for joining us on another Play It Forward Worthy podcast. If that didn't get you thinking deeper and bigger, nothing will. Thanks for joining us, and I look forward to you joining us again soon on another Play It Forward Worthy podcast.